We all like horror in different ways. Some people like the bloody murder of the slasher film. Some people like the spooky ghost stuff. Some people UFOs and aliens. Me, I actually am an all-rounder. I think most people are all-rounders. Everyone just has their minuses and pluses of their preferences. The thing for me that I find really interesting about horror films is relatability, because empathy is a big thing. As a human, it's like that thing that you need to be human. So when I'm watching a lot of horror films, I don't always find it as scary because I don't have as much empathy for the main characters. I think this is why I find slashers to be the most fun horror films, because I just find it funny that someone gets chased around with a knife, like by a guy with a knife, or an axe or whatever. It's like, yeah, I understand the idea is scary, but it's like it's never happened to me, and I'm like, maybe if I could relate to it, it'd be scarier. But at the same time, I don't really want that, I don't need that kind of empathy to be like, you're scared for the jump scares over scared for the person getting murdered. Usually it's more fun to watch them get stabbed because blood and effects and gore and that kind of stuff. It's fun. Like a zombie film, you don't want them to die. Maybe it's scary that there's zombies in the dark, but then when there are, you can get some good gore effects. So it's like a good plus and minus. So I was thinking about that, how I think I was talking with a friend of mine. I don't know what film I was discussing, but I remember how it just strikes me as interesting that I don't always find a lot of horror films to be genuinely scary. We're talking about The Exorcist. That's what it was. It's the element of how people will argue now that The Exorcist isn't scary, but at the time it was considered the scariest horror movie of all time. A lot of people still consider it as the scariest horror film of all time, which is fair enough. For me, I'd probably pin that as maybe Alien. I don't know. I don't really have a scariest horror film of all time because it can really depend on the mood or what can scare me. I actually get scared by ghost stuff. Stuff like the Conjuring films and Insidious, that stuff actually scares me. But that's just because it's usually jump scares and invisible creatures in the dark. I'm more fascinated horror-wise by creatures and, effects work like that. I love that kind of stuff. The surrealist stuff that you could do. Most of John Carpenter's filmography, let's put it that way, And that's why I could say I like someone like Michael Myers as a horror villain, because it's the embodiment of evil kind of deal. It as a creature of evil kind of design, much like Jason Voorhees. But I prefer Voorhees, by the way, same as Krueger. I prefer all of them over Michael Myers, but the fact that remains is that I like the obscurities of it that makes it more scary. Again, that's why for me the Xenomorph is one of the most terrifying creatures ever put to film. And not just because it's the perfect organism kind of thing, it's also the subtextual sexual connotations throughout the whole thing. It's nice, it's good. It's interesting. But then you get to The Exorcist, and I was watching that with my brother the other week because he hadn't seen it, and I was like, look, we've got to watch The Exorcist. It's a classic, what started a lot of this kind of horror tropes, but also, was built off of other horror tropes and redesigned them to make them scarier for a new generation kind of deal. It was the 70s, you could do that. And so, kind of like Insidious did for modern horror. A lot of people would say it's The Conjuring that changed modern horror, but it was clearly Insidious. Saw and Insidious, and that build-up of 10 years for James Wan's filmography. It's clearly it was Insidious. That's, why a lot of modern horror are jump scares, ahoy, But you look at The Exorcist, there's not really any jump scares, There are a few, there's the picture of Pazuzu, which I always find very funny. He just shows up in the corner, just bleh. But, it's this element of, we're watching it, and my brother doesn't find it scary. And I'm I don't really find it that scary either, but it's one of those things of, I don't find it scary in a relatable element. I don't see this film as, it's not scaring me, but I can understand why it's scary. I can understand it being horror, and that it doesn't always have to be something that scares you, or that makes me feel like I want to crawl up into a blanket and die. Say something like, I've had a few recent examples of horror films that have come out. Some of them weren't even horror. Jordan Peele's Nope, that gave me a bloody panic attack just because the people were getting digested alive. That was terrifying to me. Most of Hereditary was terrifying to me. There's a lot of stuff like that can like just fuel my anxieties and whatever. Like Alien scared me as a child, you know. It's still a pretty scary film now, but and of course the facehugger is still the scariest part for me, but when you look at something like The Exorcist, it's not about that kind of stuff. It's a character drama. It's about a girl who's sick, and medical science cannot rationale what is happening to her, so the mother turns to the church. Not exactly like, please God, save my daughter, but more of a, hey priest, you know that exorcist shit? Do it to my daughter, because she's fucked. And it's stuff like that I find to be really interesting about why that was scary, because you look at it like, empathy-wise, a lot of people could be scared as a parent. That's a really strong, inciting thing. That's why probably the latest Evil Dead Rise is a lot scarier for, probably nicely scarier for people who grew up with the Evil Dead films, because now they're parents. I'm not. I'm really in my mid-20s. I haven't even touched that avenue yet. And it's one of those things where it's like, I could imagine that in 10, 20, 5, 10, 15 years, I could find some of these films to even be scarier. I think it was Guillermo del Toro who had, I think he tweeted about The Exorcist, saying how it was on his rewatch, like 10, 20 years after he first watched it, that he found the film to be scary. Because by that stage, he was a parent. He could empathize with the mother, who's the protagonist of the movie, He could understand her woes and the scariness of just not knowing what to do and not knowing what this sickness is, what's wrong with your child. Are they okay? Will they live? Will they die? Is there something actually wrong? Even if you go to the emphasis of, oh, it's a spiritual thing, like their spirit is in a different dimension and a demon is possessing the body. It's like, oh my God, well, on a spiritual level, what the fuck? I'm scared for them. And it's stuff like that I can completely understand. Like, I can understand the rationale, the logic to it. It's the building blocks of a film like that. It's part of the character, it's part of the story. And I also think that it's a film that was really scary at the time because, not just because it was vastly different to the horror you'd seen beforehand, but also because there was a very religious take. And for America in particular, being a very, Christian country, it's a kind of a big deal that it's like, if you can fuel this fear from the devil or a demon-like entity controlling someone, that can be quite scary to a lot of people. For me, it's less of that is the scary part of the film. It's more of the empathy of the mother, feeling scared for her daughter. I think that's why I like films, something like Poltergeist, I think is a bit scarier for me, because as much as it is about the parents being scared for their children, it's also about the children being scared for their siblings. Like Carol Ann, like the kids are terrified because they don't know where their sister is. And I could understand, I could empathize with that because I have two brothers. I've never had any of them get stuck into a TV before, but at the same time, I could understand their plight. I understand where they're coming from. They're scared of the fact that they don't know where their sister is. But a third one, I guess it doesn't matter. So, but yeah, it's just one of those things where sometimes I have to go into a horror film with a particular mindset to allow me to understand the horror more, And again, sometimes it could just be the imagery that's scary. It could just be the ideas, the execution of said ideas. There's a lot of different elements to these films that can make them scary, And again, like I would call back to Nope with that scene. That was a film that a lot of people discussed the three different elements that made, like, three different sections that were scary for people. The main one seemed to be and spoilers if you haven't watched the film, I guess, let's just say big scary monster above a house goes gulp. That part. That part scared a lot of people. The instant silence, then the blood rain. Like, that kind of stuff was terrifying to people. I still found that scary, but I was like, this is cool. But also, I had just dealt with, like, the digestion scene, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That was a lot for me to take in. That was like, I've never really had a film give me claustrophobia before, and that was it. Earlier in the film, a friend of mine was scared of the monkey part. The part of the scene, probably at the start of the film, I think, with the monkey. Like, that was, or maybe it was like, I can't remember if the film starts, it definitely starts with that, but I think it expands on it later, I don't know, but one of those two sequences were really scary to my friend. And because it's just, that was the playing on, it's a creature of innocence that has been triggered and suddenly it's lost its mind. You know, the fear comes from that, like, that it can just be something so innocent, and like 1 minute it's the most, friendliest child or monkey person you've ever known, and then a split second later, just like the explosion of a balloon, bam, it all goes crazy, and this is the scariest moment of your entire life. Like, there's the fact that a film like that could give you 3 different sections of great horror and make people in different groups be more scared of different things. I think for me, the one that, my scariest part of that movie being the digestion scene, is the one that I keep seeing on Twitter a lot. People referenced it in regards to the latest Talk to Me film and how there's a scene in that, which I won't spoil that film at all, but there is a scene in it where it flashes to a location that a person's at. And it's a pretty gnarly image, like what's happening in it. But the thing is that, like, it's only on screen for like a couple seconds, but it's enough to stay in your mind for the rest of the film. But it's also a emphasize this is what's literally going to progress the main character into doing this. It sways the main character into doing their actions that progress the rest of the film. So it's a very key moment. And for me, I found it really amusing because, like, I had gotten scared earlier in that film by the possession stuff, but once they got to a montage and kind of the film was having more fun with itself, I was like, okay, I can like ease out of the tension and just kind of enjoy what's happening, because now it's just kind of like a lot of fun but scary fun kind of stuff that's happening. And that's what I find really amusing, because when it got to that scene that people found really scary, I was thinking immediately of a different movie that I had already seen that came out in like the mid-80s, and I think it was Society, and like it just reminded me of that, and I thought of it more as it didn't remind me of the film to the point of like, oh, now I'm thinking of a different film. It was the point of it made me think of it as like a reference. I'm like, oh, that's cute, that's like kind of like an Easter egg, but also it's also a terrifying image by itself. Like, if I had never seen Society and I saw that image, I would be like, in Talk to Me, I'd be like, oh my god, what the fuck? And I'm still thinking that. I'm like, that's still really messed up, but I think I had enough of a disconnect because it reminded me of like a terrifying but kind of goofy part of a different movie. So, yeah, I think it's just that ordeal that can make or break a film. And this is again going back to the empathy part, the relatability with characters, same as like in slasher films. Can you relate to these characters who are getting hunted by a person in a mask? Usually not. I find it more fun that way for slasher films because it's like, for me, it's all about the kills. It's all about seeing people get killed. I do like having character, stuff that I can attach to, stuff that I can like be like, oh, I hope this character survives, or like watching the latest Scream film, they all survive. Like, there are great elements, like even in the latest Scream film, with some of the legacy characters, where there's a whole sequence where one of them is getting hunted down, and they're doing like everything they can to avoid A, being killed, and B, they're constantly pursuing the idea of attacking the killer. Like, they've dealt with this for 20 odd years, they're still gonna fight back. And I appreciate when that happens, especially given it's a slasher film. That's like, if it's a first ever slasher film, whatever, like this first Scream film, of course you don't really expect people to fight back. You want them to, and you're thinking, come on, you stupid bitch, just throw a chair at them. Like I was thinking in like the second Insidious film, there's a bunch of ghosts that just pop up in his house, and I'm just thinking, just pick something up and throw it. What's the worst that could happen? Like, it goes through the ghost and they get angry? Like, who gives a shit? The ghost is already there. They're already going to probably attack you to some degree. Just try and defend yourself instead of being so shocked all the time. Oh my god, another ghost? It's not like I dealt with this like 6 months ago. Just come on. But with something like Scream, it's like, I can understand, like in slasher films in general, if it's the first of a series, or like just the initial film, if it's a standalone, it doesn't really matter. Like, the first experience for these characters to be in a slasher situation, it makes sense that they would be panicky and react differently. You want, because you're like, oh, I'm used to watching slasher films, I expect them to pick up a gun and start blasting. But they're not going to do that, because it's not realistic. You know, I know it's America in most of these slasher films, but they don't always carry guns. So, of course, it comes to Scream 6, and they do that. You know, one of the main characters who has to fight Ghostface does that. They actually defend themselves. They have a weapon. They are able to use their surrounding location to both hide and, like, both as defense and offense. There's a lot of fun stuff that they do that are, like, great twists on basically what are the conventions of, in this case, by the stage, a Scream film. So that's the stuff I find to be more fun sometimes, especially on a franchise like that. If it's a completely new film, I'm like, okay, I don't mind them doing some dumbass shit. But, like, you know, if we're gonna get a Scream 7, I kind of want them to do something different. And that's why I like Scream 6. I'm like, they did something different. You know, they actually were able to compete against the slashers. Like, one of the basic examples was you get a phone call from, you know, on your mobile, your home phone number, whatever, from the killer, yada yada. And the person picks up the phone, answers it, I know where you live, I'm going to kill you. They hang up and they click redial, and immediately, like, calls back the number that just called, and you can hear the phone calling, and she opens the door and there's the killer there, you know? Like, something like that. That's a great setup, send-up of the trope. That's fun. I don't know, that has nothing really to do with empathy, but it makes me relate more to the character. It makes me root for them more, you know? Because they're doing stuff that's fun and different, and also in line with their character to a degree as well. I just like fun and different stuff in slasher films. I've seen a lot of slasher films. I've seen a lot of ghost films. Nevertheless, it always just comes down to that simply. For me, it's, can I relate to these characters? Yay, nay, you know? I don't even need to relate to them. I just need to understand them to a degree. Like, say with Alien, like, it's still terrifying when some of the characters get killed, because it's like, they're just people, you know? They've been set up in this situation that they basically can't get out of. It's not really their fault that they're there, and except for Ash, realistically. And it's just, yeah, it's just one of those things. So, yeah, I like trying to, or being empathetic towards a person in a horror film. Not usually the killer, but like the victims, you know? Or in this case, say, like back with The Exorcist, the mother. It's a feature that I can't always get to, because sometimes you need to do things with age, you know? Like, I'm still at the age where it's, for me, watching a lot of horror films, I just want it to be fun and different. I'm not yet completely at the degree, at the age, at the part of my life where I'm going to be watching these films. Like, I could watch The Exorcist in, like, I don't know, 10, 20 years. And maybe by then I'll have kids. And I'll look at that and be like, this is terrifying, because this could be my kids, you know? I could actually be able to appreciate the empathy and how it makes me feel and makes me more scared because of that. So I think the third one is scarier because it has slasher elements to it. Kind of goofy, but I like it. So, yeah. I don't know. Let me know, I guess, your take when it comes to horror films. Because, again, we all still have our basic stuff of what will scare us. You know, for me, again, invisible things in the dark, go on clap, or whatever the hell, you know, like, that stuff will always get me, because it's usually the silence, the build up to a jump scare. That stuff will always scare me, but it's like, but does it linger, you know? Does it ring an effect throughout the rest of my day? Does it ring out throughout the rest of the screening even, you know? If it doesn't do that, then it's like, it's just fodder, you know? And that's why it's like, at least with slasher films, I can be like, I wasn't scared, but I really liked when that person was stabbed in the face, you know? Like, something like that, so. Anyway, that's all. And I'll see you next time about, I guess, other horror films. I don't know. Ciao.